Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the AST podcast. Today I'm joined by Roy Ellis and we're going to be talking about the Hayes Symposium. Thank you for joining us, Roy.
Good to be here, Allie.
Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
I am the bereavement coordinator with the Palliative Care Service here in the central region of Halifax. And so I work with families, I work with groups, I do one-on-one counseling. A lot of my time is one-on-one counseling with people, mostly with complicated grief. And then I run some clinics out in Musquodoboit Harbor, out in Windsor. And then I have a lively consulting business where I work around grief, loss, trauma, workplace death, homicide, suicide, and working also with organizations that are trying to do resiliency work and build, especially they're doing like frontline work, like whether they're working with homeless people or whether they're working with people who have experienced trauma quite regularly, like rape victims or people who experience domestic abuse. So working with organizations that work on the front lines, that's one of my passions.
Okay, interesting. So I know that we have an upcoming event, the Hayes Symposium, on June 9th and 10th, and I know you're directing the keynote night, so June 9th. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So Jody Clark, the Right Reverend Jody Clark, came up to me and asked me if I could be involved in the Hayes Symposium, and I offered immediately to be involved with the evening, the Sunday night evening, which was going to be a multimedia collaborative. I guess it's a show, but it's more like a presentation with three cancer survivors. Christine McIsaac, who is an artist, a poet, a musician, as well as a trained therapist, and was training to be a chaplain for a while before actually she got cancer. And David McGinley, who's the palliative care oncology chaplain and the palliative care chaplain that works with me, one of my colleagues, wonderful writer, teacher, and really great chaplain on our unit. So really wonderful guy, but also I think 20 years survivor of cancer. Or longer than that. I think when he was a kid, he got cancer. And then finally, Margaret Drescher, who is a Buddhist and wise and I guess a influencer in the community, and also runs Windhorse Farms, right, down in Bridgewater area. And Margaret also is a survivor of cancer. So these three survivors of cancer are coming in to St. Andrew's Church on Sunday night. To read from their poetry, to speak about their experience, and to muse together with the people who are present on what's the relationship between God and cancer, or however you define God in terms of Margaret's experience. It's not God; it's something else. So basically, those existential questions: who are we with cancer? Who is God in relationship to cancer? And how can we be in relationship with God? Or what does it mean when we get cancer, and where's God in that? So it's a pretty hot topic.
Right. And it's not just focused on survivors of cancer. It's people who have family members. Is that my understanding?
Pretty much anybody who's been touched by cancer, and that's all of us, right? I mean, cancer is
it's everywhere.
Yeah, it is everywhere. I mean, isn't that funny that you should say that, right? Like when we say that cancer is everywhere, it's an interesting statement. It says a lot about the metaphors by which we understand cancer is almost like this. It's around every corner, and it's not someone you want to meet, right? It's not like, hey,
no.
good to see you, cancer.
No, exactly.
But yeah, it is for everyone. So if you're caring for someone who has a cancer, if you have cancer yourself, if you're a survivor, or if you're right in the middle of it, you'll be inspired by these three voices. And one of them has had cancer within 4 years, one is at about 11 years, and the other one is, I think, we're talking decades. So you really get an interesting snapshot of survival across the spectrum of time, but also they had different kinds of cancers. I mean, cancer is like it's like there's so many species of cancer. Like the idea that we would call it cancer, this idea that it's kind of one thing is interesting because there's so many kinds. They're so different from each other. They act so differently. So we've got three different kinds of cancers with three different intensities and impacts on the human body. So one of the things that we've learned as we've talked together, Margaret and Christine and David and myself, and by the way, I should say Kevin Parks, our musical accompanist,
right,
is whose mother died of cancer. that the impact on the body and the way that the different cancers impacted the bodies in different ways with different sort of long-term or short-term impacts. It's fascinating. So they're just walking us into their world really deeply. It's sort of like they're going wide open with image, with song, with poems. And we're also going to have what's called sort of table readings. So we're actually going to have a table on the stage at some point, and we're going to invite members of the audience to actually come up and join them to talk about certain interesting aspects of cancer and God. And so there's actually going to be opportunity for audience members who feel like it to come up and get right in to the action.
Interesting. Yeah. So I guess since you're kind of directly involved with this, are you able to tell us the kinds of things that people go through when they're journeying with cancer? Maybe the main topics you see or anything? Or if there is, I mean, everyone's journey is probably different, so that might be a very broad question.
Well, it is a broad question, but that's okay, because that's sort of the scale of it, right? I mean, the scale of cancer, as we talked about earlier, this idea of saying like that it's everywhere and everyone's got it and everyone's touched by it. It has become the defining disease of our time. You know, before cancer, we had tuberculosis. That was the big one, right? Tuberculosis and syphilis actually were the two big killers of people. I mean, apart from just like tooth decay in the good old days, where you could die from anything, right? Like death was around every corner in a very different way. But as we sort of moved into the industrial age, and we saw the change in medicine and the change of our capacity to both diagnose and do things like antibiotics for something like syphilis, and tuberculosis too. Like both of those were just like whoop, right? Like okay, those aren't killers. Those aren't actually. You know, it used to be considered that tuberculosis, when you had tuberculosis, that was a moral problem, that you were wasting away your life's creativity, and that you needed to. Apart from getting somewhere dry and drying your lungs on and stuff, it was considered to be almost a disease of sensitive souls, like our artists and stuff like that. So, anyways, it was the killer, though, right? It was the killer of its time, and now that those diseases are gone, we have cancer, which now by and large stands for death. Like the word cancer, if you say you got cancer, it's pretty much I have some death in me.
Right.
And if the cancer is not killing, like if it's a benign tumor, for instance, it's not really cancer.
Right.
Like if it's a benign tumor, you can call that like a mushroom. It just doesn't matter. It's not cancer anymore. It's like, it's a benign tumor. We can take it out and away we go. So cancer is the one that brings you toward death. It's the one that has death on its breath.
Right.
And insofar as that's the case, we've developed a lot of language and a lot of metaphors. And I think what happens is that people, to answer your question, is we carry this freight of fear and death with it that creates all kinds of internal experiences and sociological and spiritual experiences, like, for instance, how we battle with cancer.
Right.
The idea that cancer is the adversary. And that we had to fight it, and they died in the obituaries, this person died after a long struggle and a long battle with cancer. So you think about that in terms of the experience of people as they enter in, once they get diagnosed, and with a cancer diagnosis, and instantaneously they're posited in a war, in a war zone, where their life is at stake. If you think of any other metaphor, like, for instance, if you were just to get a cut on your arm, right? And the cut was a good-sized cut, and it was open, and the wound was open. What kind of language would you use to describe the wound and your approach to the wound? Right.
It would just be like normal every day.
Right. Well, you'd want to care for the wound, right? We call it wound care.
Right.
Right. We want to care for the wound. We want to clean it. We want to treat it gently. We want to wrap it, we want to touch it, and we really want to apply love, and we want to apply care and sensitivity, and all of our focus is like, man, this thing we need care.
Right.
Could you imagine if we talked about like an open wound in our arm, the same way we talk about cancer, like we have to attack it?
Yeah.
Right?
We had
to go to war with this thing. right? You're going down.
Yeah, I
So-
beat my wound kind
right,
of thing, right?
Go away.
Yeah.
So the whole concept is really it pits us against our own body. We're instantaneously put in this really strange position, and I don't think everyone experiences this, but I think on some level there's this instantaneous shift where all of a sudden I'm at war with my body. And my body is not my friend. My body is actually becomes my enemy. Not for all. There's lots of people I think that are able to make peace and actually love their body. But I think one of the one of the powerful experiences of people with cancer is becoming lost in your own body.
Right.
Right. To becoming unfamiliar with your own body and being perhaps even an adversary to your own body. And of course, that creates a huge amount of existential dread and a crisis and feelings of loneliness when all of a sudden, well, if my body's not my friend, what do I have?
Yeah, your own body's turning on you kind of thing.
Like
right.
I'm, what's going on here? Like, who am I? Am I my body or am I at war with my body?
Right.
Or is it only just parts of my body that I'm at war with? So I think that's one of the things, the experiences. And then there's this a giant taboo around having it, and we do connect a whole bunch of moral stuff. It wasn't long ago that we were talking about, like if you weren't living right, or if you had too much stress in your life, or if you weren't eating enough kale, if you were angry, if you were too emotional, if you were too repressed, if you hadn't dealt with your stuff, right? That cancer was like this invidious sort of immuno suppressor.
Right.
Right?
Okay.
That if you were holding anxiety in your body or anger in your body, or let's say or trauma in your body, that enough of that could cause cancer. I remember literally when I was doing my chaplaincy training, one of our chaplaincy training professors talking to a woman who actually had breast cancer in our group. And for the most part, what he was doing was telling her that the reason why she had breast cancer was because she was carrying some untold stories inside of her.
Interesting.
Right? Some unspoken energy. So like that's pretty voodoo, right? So, but this is still out there. This is not a like the whole, like if you don't live well, people always say he got cancer and he was exercising, he was eating right, loving his kids. How can this happen?
Right.
As if somehow those things will inoculate you against death.
Interesting.
Or cancer. So I think some of the things, apart from just the madness of watching your beautiful life go from kids and work and your hobbies to a slave to an industrialized medical system, which has you come in on the hour and do this and do the chemos, and all you are is a person with cancer. That's all you are for a little while, and you actually never stop being a person with cancer once you have it. So that's the other thing. It's this moniker that you take on, and for life. It's a
part of you now.
It is, and it's a big part of you. And so the question is like, how do we love that part? And then what's God got to do with that? Like, what's God got to do with any of that?
Right. Interesting. So how do you yourself retain hope when you're surrounded with so much sadness and death, I guess?
It's a great question. I have an interesting relationship with hope. I think it's both a dictator at times, and tyrannical, and unhelpful when it's used as a defense against deep fear and deep sadness, or death, or ultimate loss, like when someone dies or when someone's dying. So you asked me how I keep hope in my work.
Yeah.
Maria. So I'm not I have a relationship with hope as I do with emptiness or like with loneliness. I just think it's one of the things that we do as human beings. But it is not the end all and be all of human experience, and this is very much a sort of an eschatological issue, right? This idea of, that hope is always this sort of light shining, like on the horizon line, right? And no matter how frickin' bad and dark and ugly it is right here, just keep your eyes on the shining, glowing light on the horizon. And that can be a long, long ways away. And in fact, for many of the cancer survivors, and certainly I know that Christine McIsaac, one of the people that was speaking at the Hayes Symposium evening that we're doing, for her that light just almost snipped out.
Oh, wow.
Like, there's no hope. It's darkness. Like illness, take just the word cancer on, just like deep physical illness that takes away your energy and takes away your spark and takes away your friends and your hobbies and your ability to work and your ability to study and your ability to concentrate and your ability to be pain-free, your ability to laugh and be humorous and to play. Like the first thing that goes, I think, when people get really sick is their playfulness, right? Because it's just like, it's just, you have to have energy to play. So where's the hope in that? Like, how do you find hope? So part of my answer is that I think sometimes hope is overrated, and I think sometimes we have to just be hopeless.
Right.
And no one ever died from being hopeless, but people certainly. I mean, don't get me wrong. You don't want to live there forever. It's kind of like going up into the death zone on Everest, right? Like, we can live up there for a while. It's not good up here, but let's see, or go down into a cave, right? Like, no one lives in caves and no one lives on mountaintops. We're valley people. But sometimes we go down. We have our, what Thomas More calls like our dark nights, or our night sea journeys on those deep, dark, hopeless places that aren't supposed to be full of joy and light, that speak to us and that speak of the human experience with depth and with pain and suffering and chaos and disorganization. And that all the literature on transformation says that literally, that sort of disorganization is how growth happens. Dan Siegel talks about even kids when they're learning to walk, when they're starting to grow, that they go through this period of stumbling around and falling and tripping and goofy, because it's just growth by definition is disorganized. And we see that in every structure and every organism, and any organic thing that goes through a growing period, it goes through a period of disorganization. And during those periods, especially existentially, when it's something like a crisis, a human crisis of growth, where you're going through a divorce or a death or an illness, this huge sense of identity confusion, huge sense of existential lostness. And to be able to embrace that deeply is to be able to accept that the hopelessness in those moments. That's not to say that hope is completely off the charts completely, but I don't look to it like a savior, because it can only take you so far. Hope's great when you need it. Like if hope gets a lot of people through a lot of places, but it also can be inhibitory. It can actually turn us away from the work and the growth that we need to do, to shine the light, and keeps us future focused and takes us out of the present.
Right.
So one of the things that I do is to keep hope in perspective.
Oh, interesting.
And to give, because when people get all hung up on hope, then it ends up being sort of this sort of optimistic trip too, staying positive, staying hopeful, and then they never get to drop in and just say, I am so sad and broken and unbelieving that this is my life, that I'm that I have cancer, or that I have heart disease, or that I have this chronic, whatever. So hope can block those things too. So so I just keep it in perspective, use it when I need it, and not afraid to let go of it when there's deeper work to do.
Awesome. And then last question, do you have any advice for pastors or ministers who are caring for congregants who are going through cancer?
Yeah, sure. Listen to them. Like the primary experience of illness is loneliness, right? Of not having a shared language, if not even having a self language at that point, right? Because we go into that period of disorganization that I was talking about, and this deep sense of dread and disorganization. So then we lack a shared language in that moment. This is why cancer survivors and people who are grieving, and this is why there's groups of people with like brain cancer that get together like just to chat. Yeah. Right, because like they understand each other, even if they don't have the language, they have the experience, and so there's this great deal of camaraderie and sort of like a foxhole sort of mentality And we know that some of the research says that the men that came home from the Vietnam War who had a buddy were less likely to experience post-traumatic stress disorder than those who didn't. Right, so having buddies and having someone to talk to is inoculates and actually helps to improve your chances of healing and of feeling better and not developing more psychological and challenges. So one of the things we need to do is learn to listen and help people with cancer to find people, groups of people to talk to, and courageous hearts that don't mind getting slopped with the existential crisis and the dread and the confusion and the identity stuff, because that stuff is no fun to be around, right?
Right.
It feels like it will contaminate you, and we are still living in a time, we are not far from the time where tuberculosis and syphilis, these were communicable diseases, and there's still this kind of crazy thought that cancer is communicable.
Right.
Right? I mean, it's just this person has cancer, we know you can't catch it, but at the same time, being around it too much might not be the best thing.
Right.
So it's very few are the people that can really be comfortable around cancer and can look it in the face and just say, so this is what it is. This is who you are. I love you. I'm here to listen to you, or not to listen to you if you don't want to listen to you. But I think to just do way more listening and way less advice giving. To walk in to dance, just to go in and dance. And not to go in with an agenda.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for joining us, Roy, and we will have all the information about the Hayes Symposium linked below. So thanks.
Link it. And come on Sunday night. We should tell them the...
Sunday night on June 9th, and then there's a workshop day on June 10th.
At St. Andrew's United Church.
And then June 10th is here at AST, and Roy will be speaking there as well. So.
Right. So come on down. Yell.